Welcome everybody again to hour 2. This is where we get started on the actual residential lease document. A question was brought up during the break by Anthony, which is pretty important, and it has to do with your time and your efforts to determine whether the prospect that you're dealing with, I'm talking about a tenant prospect, may be truly interested of going through the process or not. It's all about time. We're all limited by time, and that is the most important thing in your business. Leases are not the most profitable engagement with clients that you can have, but it's a service that we provide, and therefore we need to attend to. However, how do you decide, and when do you decide, that you're going to get in your car and you're going to show individuals properties who are interested in leasing? Frequently with today's technology, what will happen is you will be approached by a person who may even give you a list of properties that they want to go see. That's the very easy part of the process. For someone to come up with a laundry list of properties that they want you to drive them to. You're the person with the key. But remember, there is no reassurance at this point in time that you're going to be dealing with someone who may be motivated as you are, to assist them. Therefore, and this has to do with Anthony's question, is it better, or wouldn't it be a better idea to produce a lease application ahead or in anticipation of you getting them into your car to go and show them properties? And I say getting them into your car, a lot of times these days you don't get them into your car, they just follow you, or they just meet you at the property. So, I have about 30 seconds to address this issue so that we can get started with this. Let me say this. There are two very important factors among all of the things that you have to keep in mind. One is your time, but perhaps most importantly is even your own safety. So it is very important that you understand who it is that you're going to be doing business with. I would start the process by having a conversation on the phone perhaps first, or even in person, and then an invitation to come to the office to complete some of the paperwork that it is required for us to start the process of showing. This is in the part of setting the correct expectations. When you meet him face-to-face, you will present them with an IABS. You will request a copy, or you will request their driver's license for you to make a copy. And at that point in time, you will put the applications in front of them. Okay? At that point, we would also ask them if they have a current credit report from all 3 bureaus. If they do, you will take that and you will make a copy of those documents as well. Also, if they present you with a list, I will not stop at that point from having a needs analysis conversation. That's where you get to know what it is that they're looking for, and more particularly, other items that you know could be associated with this process. That's when I ask them about, do you have pets? What's important to you about finding the next home? Have you leased before? Are you new to the area? Do you even have a credit history in the United States? Remember, you're dealing with people in the community from all walks of life. You may be dealing with somebody from Mexico City, or London, or Nigeria, or some other place in the globe where they may not understand what the process of engaging in leasing a property. I can tell you that there are many other countries that if a property is for lease and they're interested in renting, the only thing they have to do is show up with the money, and frequently cash. And there is no process in other countries, some other countries, to actually engage in this. So their expectations may be misaligned with what we do. So if you put them on the right track from the get-go, get them to fill out an application, get them to you the documents, explain to you that it's not just as simple as getting in the car and showing up at a house to show it to them. Many times these properties are occupied with other tenants, sometimes even with the landlords. You have to make appointments. They have to give you time to go through that process. So just because they are in a hurry, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to grab your keys and your Supra and there we go. Because that's putting the wagon in front of the horses. You have to start from the very beginning. And the very beginning is, as you are making those copies, have them sign the IABS, have them complete the applications. Sometimes you may only be dealing with one party. Guess what? You need applications from both sides. So this may be a two-part process. Complete this, take this to your spouse or significant other, and then send it back to me. At that point in time, we will actually evaluate what properties remain available from the ones that you would like to see. You have to contact the other agents. I would suggest before, even if it says active on the MLS, that you do contact the listing agent to find out if the property is in fact still available. In this market of rapid turnovers, you may see a property came on the market 2 days ago. You assume that it's active because it says active on the MLS, only to find out you go through all this process, you identify the right property for your tenant, you complete all the application, you send it in, and the listing agent will say, oh, I'm sorry, we actually have multiple applications for this property and my client, the landlord, has already accepted an application. That's a waste of time for you. It's a roller coaster of emotions for your tenants. They begin to lose confidence in you as a professional through no fault of your own. So if you do things in the right order, you're a lot more likely to have your clients, in this case the prospect tenant, to be on the same wavelength that you are, not to put them in a roller coaster of emotions, and not to waste your time. Everybody understands that part? So it is very important that you do have to come meet him at the office, or at least get the documents via email or what have you before you actually embark in the showing of homes. All right, as promised, this is the residential lease contract. Let's assume for a second that you submitted applications and now you have been invited by the landlord's agent to go ahead and submit a contract. I have great news for you. Most of the times in our environment, meaning the Woodlands, Spring, Conroe, Tomball, Montgomery, Oak Ridge, Shenandoah, sometimes even Kingwood and Porter and other adjacent places, Montgomery, Willis, listing agents in this area already have a residential lease contract ready to send it to you. That is highly desirable. Okay? So before you actually engage in completing the residential lease, ask this question from the listing agent for the landlord. Do you have already prepared a lease agreement that you would like us to complete for your landlord? Because if that is the case, and you will see in a minute, if you have never seen a lease contract before. There are many fields that you will be wondering, what do I put in this field? Because number one, you may have never done one. Number two, because you really don't know the expectations of the landlord. So I have several properties as an investor that I own. Let's say that you brought me a tenant to one of my properties. Guess what? I already have expectations from what your clients should do, should perform. When do I actually need payment by? You know, who do they send the payment to? You know, how much am I going to charge your prospect tenant if they're late on the rent, if their check bounces, expectations as to who they notify if there is something that breaks in the property. So I have most of the answers for your questions before you even ask them. So if you send me a lease contract and you do not ask me, do you have one available that you would like us to complete, you may have just wasted a couple of hours of your time. So do ask that question, yes.
I have two friends that are realtors right now that are battling it out with this. One is working with the landlord and the other brought a tenant to the landlord. Who is supposed to write up the lease? Because this friend, she that brought the tenant to the landlord says that that realtor is supposed to draw up the lease because she doesn't know what's supposed to be in it, and this realtor is saying, no, you're supposed to do it. So they've been kind of pointing the fingers at each other for the past couple of weeks.
Great.
Who is responsible for this?
That's a great question, and that's why I'm addressing it in this fashion. If you have a prospect tenant and you approach the landlord's agent, is there a document that is already completed to the extent that the landlord will accept? I will gladly request that you send me the document so that we can move forward and complete the remaining fields. If there isn't such document available, then it is your responsibility as a tenant's representative to formulate the lease, residential lease, just as you would with a purchase contract. Remembering that you may have to explain to your prospect tenant that we don't know what the expectations of the landlords are, and simply because we put a certain day or a certain amount, it may or may not be accepted. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I would think that it would be the other agent's responsibility because you don't know what's in it.
And so the other agent meaning who? The landlord's representative?
Right. I would think that it would be them that would have to draw up the lease contract because they know what's supposed to be in there.
Well, and that's what I just asked. From your client, from your tenant, is there a document that is already prepared that will meet the expectations of the landlord? But if there isn't, and your client still, as a prospect tenant, wants the property, you have to begin somewhere. If they insist that you formulate the beginnings of the document, why not, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's about setting the expectations correctly. There is not written anywhere that would say, okay, you're responsible for this or you're responsible for that. It's not, it's a procedural matter more than anything. And tell you what, there are companies that will teach their agents, do it this way or don't do it that way. But the reality is, when you're in the trenches, if I have a tenant, I would ask you, do you have a document that you have already prepared that meets your landlord's expectations? If so, do you mind sending it my way? And if you say, no, you guys have to submit, guess what? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to sit with my client and start filling in the blanks with setting the expectations to my tenant, prospect tenant, that, hey, simply because we're putting this in the blank, it doesn't mean that the landlord is not going to want to change it. So it's a smoother transition or process. if you let the landlord's representative have the first go at it. If not, then give them something to work with.
And Raul, I have seen that even on sale contracts where the listing agent should provide all the necessary disclosures in terms of mud district, for example, and they don't do it.
Correct.
And so it's up to the buyer's agent to
Yeah.
pull that stuff together. So
Yeah.
you should be prepared to do it in a lot of situations.
I think one advantage you have then, the reason you do it as a landlord is because you want it a certain way.
Yes.
And one advantage you have as the buyer's agent or representing the tenant or the buyer is that you might just check a few boxes that are preferential to your client.
Yes.
And the landlord might just go, oh yeah, whatever, I'll take it. So it's not a bad thing to initiate.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, it sometimes just because the landlord requests a certain thing doesn't mean that they will not accept some variance of what they have created as a template. In fact, as we move forward through this document, you will see this is my template. Okay, don't think that because I have it embedded in my template that you have to do it this way. Your landlord may want you to do something completely different. Frank is absolutely right. We as professionals, as RE/MAX representatives to our clientele, we're expected to go above and beyond. Sometimes what may be considered, and this is to address Bev's comments here, that what may be considered laziness on the part of or lack of professionalism on the listing agents may work towards our advantage, and where we can actually introduce items in the contract that may be favorable to our clients. So sometimes it's true laziness, because how much time does it take to produce a municipal utility district disclosure? Not much at all. In fact, that is one of the disclosures that the homeowners are supposed to produce. But they will not produce them unless the listing agent enforces that. Guess what? We're dealing with other companies that house agents that may do 1 or 2 transactions a year. Well, guess what? You're not in a company that does that. We may do 10 times what they do. And so we get in a certain rhythm. Remember, we have to have our expectations set correctly as well. Just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean that that should slow us down. I'm involved in a transaction with an agent who's broker owner in Pearland right now. And let me tell you, I think they are representative of what we do in the Woodlands. Very proactive, very ready, all the documents without even having to request. The more you prepare, the more you create systems for yourself, the more you're going to be respected by your commune of professionals in the Woodlands and adjacent areas. The smoother the transaction is going to go for you, because somebody who goes to the nth degree to prepare, they're not going to formulate problems for you along the way, because in some cases they're intimidated to even approach you. Yeah, go above and beyond. Don't be afraid to ask, do you mind if I do this document for you for the sake of time? And then, because you do it, they're a lot less likely to want to change it on you. Okay? All right, I promise that I'm going to start scrolling through here.
People who go from a different lease or have their own lease, you're out there showing properties.
I do not understand the question, I'm sorry.
Most people use the residential lease contract, or do they have a form of their own? Like, say a landlord has their own lease.
Okay.
Doesn't use this.
So we only work with promulgated contracts from the state of Texas, whether it's a TREC form or a TAR form. The forms aesthetically may look a little bit different, but all the information comes from the same sources. Actually, if you use zip forms, which is a vehicle that we utilize regularly in our office, most agents, who are those agents who have had an opportunity to deal with producing forms, who uses zip forms in this room? Okay. Who uses other than zip forms? Okay. Zip forms, it's simply an online process that allows you to complete forms, the latest, the most updated forms available to real estate agents in the state of Texas, licensees. You can go there without fear that you're going to be completing documents that are outdated. That is the promise. So if you're going to go searching for documents in other places such HAR.com or TREC, the Texas Real Estate Commission website, you would also find updated forms, but you may come across PDF forms as opposed to forms that you can actually fill in. If you're not familiar, who is not familiar with zip forms in this classroom? Don't be afraid to raise your hand. 1, 2, am I missing? Are you familiar with zip forms? Okay.
Yeah, my real estate board had the farm service, where you could fill in the forms, but I don't know that it was.
Okay. Okay, to those of you who are not really familiar with zip forms, I highly, highly encourage you to keep an eye on the training calendar for the next zip forms class that we're going to have, because it's going to be extremely useful to you. It will save you tons of time. It will really make you look like the professional that you are, or that you strive to be. So write zip forms. If you want to go to the zip forms website, do www.zipform+.com. And by the way, zip forms, you don't have to pay a monthly fee for. This is part of the benefits of being a Texas Association of Realtors member, and so that is free of charge to you. Okay? DocuSign, on the other hand, is a third-party vendor which facilitates the signature process that is embedded into zip forms. Zip forms also has another vendor which is free of charge for you to obtain signatures. So zip forms may give you what you need. DocuSign, it's a zip form signature on steroids that allow you to do a lot more than just signing zip forms. All right, so the parties, names of the landlord and tenant, sometimes as a tenant's representative, you may not know who the landlord is, so feel free to leave that field blank. The property address you will find, the legal description of the property you may find on the MLS by simply clicking on the number that appears on the tax record. Should I demonstrate, Frank?
Yes, you should.
Why not?
This is massively important.
Forgive me to those of you who have never seen Tempo. This is Tempo. I'm part of the dinosaur community of real estate. Many of you are only familiar with Fusion. It does the same things. One of these days I will get on the Fusion bandwagon. For right now, pretend for a second that you're still in the 1980s And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for a property that is for lease in our area. So we are in area 15. I'm going to look for one that is in 773A1, and I'm going to look for properties that are in the $2,300 range to $3,000 range. Only active, because I don't care to see properties that are already under contract. And so in doing the search, I will come up with 20 properties that appear to be in our area. Okay? So I'm going to pick one at random. And so I'll pick the last one here. And it happens to be my listing. And so if you see in the description of the property, you will see that there is a tax record number up here. If you click on this, you will come up with the tax information sheet, and appropriately enough, at the very top, you will have a property legal description, which you can actually highlight, right-click, and copy, and then you will return to your document, and you can actually go right-click. If this was actually zip forms, it would allow you to right-click on this field and complete it. Just put the property legal description on there. Put the address up on the top. And any non-real property items that need to be part of this, for instance, a large screen television that you saw in the living room, and maybe swimming pool equipment that is part of the swimming pool. You may want to include that in there. The commencement date is actually the day that the lease, you propose that the lease will begin and when it would expire. Now, let me say to you that sometimes leases will begin in the middle of the month, simply because the client needs the home in the middle of the month. Now, this is going to be a little bit quirky, so follow me on this. Follow me on this. Most landlords will want their rent to go from the very first day of the month to the last day of the month. Got that? All right. So what if February 15 is the first day that your prospect tenant is willing to move into the property? What do? So you start on that day, right? But when you do that, let's say you want to go a year in length. You're going to go from March 1st to February 28th of the following year, and then you're going to prorate the beginning to February 15th. Let's see if that works again. Your client wants to start on the 15th of February. Want to do a lease for a year. Don't count February 15th to February 14th of the following year. Most landlords will object to that. So you do February 15 to February 15, 2014 through March 31st of 2015. Make sense? All right. So you're really prorating the first 15 days of February. When a lease is submitted, you're expected to do two things. Come up with a deposit for the property, typically shown to be in this field right here. Everybody sees that? Okay. Which is near where the application fee is. And typically what a landlord expects to see is the monthly amount for the rent that month. Typically, the amount of the deposit is equal to 1 month rent. Now, this is getting in the weeds and in the trenches, but you need to know this. When you secure a payment for a landlord, remember, you're beyond the application process. You have been given a green light to submit the application. Produce a check, cashier's check, in the name of the landlord for 1 month deposit. Produce the first full month rent, in this case, March 1st through March 31st. March has 31 days, right? And that is in the name of the company that you're doing business with. If you're representing the landlord here, we would expect you to have 1 month rent as a cashier's check in the name of the landlord for deposit, 1 month rent as first month payment in the name of RE/MAX, the Woodlands and Spring, also a cashier's check. Make sense? All right. So what happens to the first 15 days? Your client wants to go on February 15th. That means that you need to explain to your tenant, yes, you're giving me a check for a month deposit and a month rent right now. On March 1st, you will be expected to pay February 15th through February 28th. And then on the 1st of April, you will begin to make full month payments all the way through the end of the lease. Does that make sense? One more thing that you need to know. Please tell your prospect tenants, that unlike in some other states, the deposit is not last month's rent. They're expected to pay the last month's rent. And once they vacate the property, all of this is in the property code, crystal clear. Once they vacate the property, the landlord has 30 days to return the remaining amount of the property deposit, security deposit. I said the portion of, because even though they pay 1 month rent, there is one document that I didn't get into, but it's part of all this array of documents that you will have in that little package that it's available to you, is a property inventory and condition form. The property inventory and condition form has typically need to be completed within the first 10 days that the tenant arrives in the property and makes note of every little thing that is not in accordance to their expectation, broken, defective, in poor condition. And that needs to be turned back to the landlord's agent within 10 days, because that is the same document that the landlord will use upon departure of the tenant from the property to evaluate the condition of the property in comparison to when the property was received. Make sense?
Is that a HAR or TREC form?
Yes,
Promulgated form?
TAR form.
Who is holding the damage deposit?
Okay, I don't know what you refer to as a damage deposit, but remember, there is a deposit. It's not called a damage deposit.
Sorry.
Yes.
So there's one check to the broker and there's one check to the landlord. So the check to the landlord is for the rent, is that correct?
No, the check for the landlord is for the deposit. What do you think that the check for the first month rent goes to? And why is it written in the name of RE/MAX or in the name of Keller Williams or whatever? Any ideas? That's because half of that typically, and please remember, when you go look as to, you see in the process of trying to lease this property, understand that there is a compensation field that shows you as a tenant's representative how much you're going to receive. It's a half month. So when RE/MAX the Woodlands and Spring gets a check, writes a check, for the splits of commissions to you, and then for the other company. The other way, same way happens with another company. Yes, Frank.
So I understand that's typical on a 12-month lease. What would be typical on a shorter term lease?
Typically, what's equivalent to a 1-month rent, it's prorated on the monthly basis. So if you divide 100%, if you go and do a division of 100% divided 12, that will bring you to 8.33% per month. But guess what? That is for both sides. So when you do half, you multiply 4.116 of the rent times 8 months, for instance, if the month was a month's rent. And that's what you would derive.
So the rate's the same.
The rate is the same. You would just get less than a half month based on the number of months that your client is going to be leasing the property. Make sense? All right. So now going back, and I did mention a document. I'm just going to show you for a second what it is that we are talking about here. On the residential lease and inventory condition, this is a 5-page document that covers just about every portion imaginable of the property, and this is what you will give as a landlord's agent to a tenant when they move in. Okay, and sometimes this form will come through you. So what happens is, it's in your package. What happens is your tenant moves in, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, you get the property condition inventory form, or if you don't, make sure that your client, the tenant, gets it upon moving into the property, because they have to produce this within X number of days, typically 10 days. But in some cases,